So this presentation is all about managed service accounts, or also service accounts, with the focus in this case of managed, looking at the new stuff. Some thanks for the sponsors of this event, because without them it wouldn't be possible to do this. So make sure to visit the stands of those sponsors. A little bit about me, as already said, Senior Incident Response Lead. I've been working with identity for many, many years, securing it, but also recovering it when things go bad. Think about attacks, think about ransomware, think about everything that can go wrong. And in this case, I'm more focused on the old stuff, Active Directory. Wrote a few scripts that are being used by many, many companies throughout the world. So if you have any feedback, just let me know, and I'll try to fix stuff as soon as possible. The evolution of service accounts. So since the Stone Age, we have been using the so-called legacy service accounts for many years, as insecure as you can imagine. And because of that, Microsoft came up with the so-called standalone managed service accounts. Improvement in security, somewhat. And then again, there was still not much movement. Then Microsoft came up with the group managed service accounts. More flexibility, more servers, or at least to use one account on multiple servers. But then again, although there was more adoption, not much happened because many companies still use the old stuff. Because moving away is painful. It's reality. And because of that, Microsoft came up with Server 2025, Delegated Managed Service Accounts, which basically allowed you to, in summary, I'm going to talk a lot about it later on, allows you to keep using the old one, but let's say connected to another account, which then becomes automatically managed. More security. But then again, when something new is developed, what are the catches? What are the things that can go wrong? And there are things that can go wrong. Let's have a look at the legacy service accounts. Those things are all over the place. Think about services, scheduled tasks, key tabs, everywhere. And it's just like your user account or an admin account. It's just a user account for a specific purpose, a service. And because of that, it has a static password. That's one of the things where things are already wrong. The password is static. Nobody likes to change the password on a service account because you have to touch the service account in Active Directory, for example, and probably also on many servers. And because of that, it means you have to have a maintenance window or outage or whatever, and things could go wrong or will go wrong. Most of the times, those are configured with service principal names to, let's call it, define the service. So that's easily look up, and it hands over TGS tickets. RC4 support. Well, let's see what's going to happen in a month, because if I'm not mistaken, in a month or so, Microsoft has been changing quite a lot of stuff to move away from RC4, and suddenly the last few months from very quickly to AAS. I don't have a glass ball, but I'm really excited in what's going to happen in a month on all those systems that are going to break because of the sudden change of not being able to support AAS for whatever reason. And those service accounts most of the time are overprivileged, too many permissions, maybe domain admin or something that is very near to domain admin. Application owners having multiple accounts. And because all those passwords also, all those accounts need to be managed, I've seen it happen where a application owner has multiple accounts, has an admin account, has a user account, and after performing a security assessment on the, let's call it how passwords are being used, you see that all those accounts have the same password. Compromise one, you have all the others. It's reality, stuff happens. Naming conventions. What is a so-called service account? Have you already defined a naming convention up front, and are you sticking to it? Because if you don't, well, one of the problems with service accounts is, first of all, how do you find them in Active Directory? What is a service account? And even if you know already what a service account is in your AD, how the hell do you even know it's being used? Because those things are all over the place, or could be all over the place. And if you don't have ownership and recertify the account from time to time. Recertify means asking the owner, hey, do you still need this? Yes or no? If the answer is no, get rid of it. So it's painful. And because it's so painful, this is what attackers love. Password never expires because the password is static. Overprivileged, weak passwords, and because of that, the best attack for this one is the so-called Kerberos roasting attack. Easy and very effective, very powerful attack. So when you look and compare legacy service accounts to any other managed service accounts, standalone, group, or delegated, what is the main benefit? Thinking that if the managed service account is more secure than the legacy service account, that's not true. It still has similar issues, different but similar. The really difference between the legacy service account and any other managed service account is the automatic password management. The legacy service account has a static password. You have to change the password. With the managed service account, it's a system itself that's based on a certain interval. Most of the times it's 30 days. We'll talk about it more later on. It changes the password using a specific mechanism, and it keeps changing it and changing it and changing it. And the password is very, very strong. It's not crackable. So the Kerberos roasting attack against such an account, managed service accounts, it's impossible because the passwords are too strong. So Kerberos roasting would be history for these accounts because, like I said, it's impossible to execute, at least for the managed service accounts. I decided, let's ask AI for Kerberos roasting being history. This is the answer that I got. A picture. Bella asked, draw me a picture about showing me what does it mean Kerberos roasting being history. This is what I got. I'm like, well, this was not the intention that I had in my mind. And I still didn't want to draw a picture. I changed the prompt. I just added an exclamation mark. What is the picture now? This. Well, the emotion is right. It's not what I was thinking of, but at least the emotion of Kerberos roasting being history is correct. So, compared to the legacy service accounts, the managed service accounts have one benefit. It's the automatic password management and also service principal name management, the SPNs on the accounts. But still, you still have to have a naming convention. You have to own it. You have to maintain it. And if you don't need it anymore, think about recertification, get rid of it. Or if you do need it, extend it. You need to have some kind of a process that from time to time recertifies those accounts to make sure that if it's not needed anymore, get rid of it. In my view is anything in your Active Directory or basically in any other system, anything is a risk. Anything. You don't need it, get rid of it. Because every risk needs to be managed somehow. So, and also the last one, because of the whole mechanism of the password and all the things work, whether it's a legacy service account or a managed service account, the server that account is being used on, if that server is not protected correctly, any account, legacy or managed, it's toast. Compromise the server, anything on it, including all the accounts, are also compromised. So make sure to secure the server itself. Focusing on standalone managed service accounts, you can only use it on one computer. It's impossible to use it on multiple computers. So first you link it to a computer in Active Directory, then you have to install it on the server itself, test authentication to see if it works, and then configure the server, schedule task, whatever. Very easy. If you want to transfer it, you have to remove it from that server, unlink it, relink it, and then do all those steps again. Password management. As soon as you install the standalone service account on a server, the password will immediately be set on the account itself and also told to the computer what it is so that the computer at some point in time starts managing it every 30 days, which is the default of the computer. The computer itself changes the password every 30 days, so does the standalone managed service account. But it doesn't mean that it's using the interval is itself, but it will not, let's say, change it at the same point in time. It's just the interval that is exactly the same. The behavior is also exactly the same. So if you look at these security options, If you configure these security options on the computer, for the computer itself, it will also influence the behavior of the so-called standalone managed service account on that computer. It follows the exact same behavior. When I was investigating all this, the standalones, the groups, and the delegated managed service accounts, investigating, finding information, correlating it with event logs, it was really difficult. So in the end, I decided for every single account, and this is for the standalone managed service accounts, to write a script that outputs all the data that is relevant and important and available in Active Directory to show it to me so that I can have all the information in one view so that I can use it. And then when you look at it, one of the things that you can see, the password last set of the standalone managed service account, when it was last set, also of the host itself, and also to which server it's being linked. So we have all that information, and this one is specifically for standalone managed service accounts. So group managed service accounts, a different class, totally different mechanism. Centralized password management. So where the password of a standalone managed service account was managed by the computer itself, with a group managed service account, it's not managed by the computer anymore. Because the group managed service account, it was one of the problems with the standalone one, you can only use it on one computer. With the group managed service account, you can use it on multiple computers. And because of that, if you have 10 computers using one account, who is going to manage the password? All of them? That's going to be a mess. One, still going to be a mess. So the only thing that can manage that password is Active Directory itself. And to make sure that when the calculation of the password occurs and the end result is always the same, you need to have specific data. And one of the specifics that are important is the so-called KDS root key that is in Active Directory, and that every single Active Directory domain controller can manage and access, and also access. And then using specific information of the account itself, it calculates the password. So the answer or the response for the password will always be the exact same. Every single time you ask for the password, it will be the exact same value. So looking at the KDS root key, it has a key identifier because that's what is being used to reference to that key. It has a creation time, when it was created, and a so-called use start time. There's a difference between the two, because when you create an object, it has been created at a specific moment in time, but can you actually start using it immediately? The answer is no, because it still has to replicate to all the other domain controllers in the forest, and if it's a huge forest, it can take quite some time. So you need to specify a moment of time that you can say, this is when you can start using it. So it first needs to replicate, and only after that you can use it. That's what the start means, use start time means. And it can be shared across multiple computers, but I already mentioned that, which is the flexibility compared to standalone ones, or you just focus on one computer, so you can choose whatever you want.
Great.
The managed password interval, and this is a tricky one that you need to pay attention to. By default, when you create a group managed service account, and you don't specify an interval, which nobody does, by the way, you always get the 30 days interval. My suggestion is to never use the 30 days anymore, to use a lower value of 3 to 5 days. There's a whole reason behind it, but I will, throughout the presentation, I will talk about it, but let me already give you a hint. Why would you need to decrease the value? Use a lower value. It's not necessarily that the 30 days are less secure. That's not the reason. There's one scenario that helps you if the interval is lower. And the scenario is, imagine the very painful procedure of performing a full password reset of every single account of your Active Directory. Looking at all the accounts that are possible within your AD, there are 2 accounts for which it's impossible to perform a password reset. One is the group managed service account, the one you see on screen, and the other one, next one, it's a delegated managed service account. It is impossible to perform a full password reset against those accounts if you need to. because those follow a specific interval. For group managed service accounts and delegated managed service accounts, you would need to wait 2 resets. So when you think about 2 resets and also the default 30 days, when is it, let's say, secure again? 60 days. That's quite a long time. You can't wait 60 days. So decreasing it to say, let's say 3 to 5 days, you have less time that you need to wait for. Obviously, you need to have a look at your replication of your AD to see how that it behaves when you lower it, but not using the 30 days is definitely very recommended. Use something that is lower. The managed password array is the identifier that references the key identifier so that the account knows which key, KDS root key, is going to be used. The first one, the current one, but also the previous one. Because group managed service accounts and also delegated managed service accounts have a so-called current password and a previous password. And that mechanism is important because when something changes, it still needs to replicate, and all the servers using those accounts can still use the previous or the current one, so that it has the time to switch from one to the other. The managed password. If you think that both group managed service accounts and delegated service accounts do not have passwords on the account configured themselves, they do. Every single authenticatable account, users, computers, group, delegated managed service accounts, all of them have a password on the account itself. But what is the managed password? The managed password attribute is a constructed attribute, and constructed means it's calculated on request when you actually need it. The system is going to calculate what the end value is going to be. And so when a system uses the so-called group or delegated managed service accounts, because the mechanism is the same for both, a system that is allowed to retrieve a password, because it's allowed to ask the domain controller, hey, give me the password. The domain controller using the KDS root key referenced through the identifiers, but also specific information of the account itself, including the interval, because one of the things that I didn't mention before, the interval can only be specified during creation. Afterwards, you cannot change it anymore. So if you were thinking, oh, let's change the existing ones to 30, that's impossible. You would need to recreate all the accounts. That's the only way to do it. So based on the metadata of the account itself, it recalculates the password, hands it over to the server so that the server then can use the account and authenticate it against Active Directory. That's how the whole mechanism works. As I mentioned, forcing a password reset is impossible. There is a trick though with all kinds of steps. It's basically fooling the system, and it has quite a lot of work in it. But forcing like any other account, it's not possible anymore. You can query the password from Active Directory. If you are not allowed to query, you need to be in a specific list, which is, let's call it a so-called permission on that the account. If you're not allowed, you will not get an answer from the domain controllers. If you are allowed to retrieve the password, because otherwise it would be very easy and anyone would be able to request a password. If you are allowed, you get the password by just performing an LDAP query. And then if you have a mix of writable domain controllers and also, God forbid, read-only domain controllers, only the writables can calculate the password. The RODCs are not able to calculate the password. And the reason for that, it's in Active Directory itself, because when you look at it, this is let's say the secret information, the stuff in the red box, the secret information of the KDS root key itself. It is available on the writables, but it's not available on the read-only domain controllers. And the reason for that is because those attributes are part of the so-called filtered attribute set. Why? Because if it's a secret, by default, read-only domain controllers are untrusted. Those were designed to be in untrusted locations. So anything that is secret, by default, does not go to RODCs. So that's why those cannot calculate it. And I was talking about how the managed password is being calculated, but also who is allowed or not. There's an attribute on every single account for a group managed service account, but also delegated. That is the so-called MSDS group MSA membership, which is basically a permission. if you have an account or a group that is part of that ACL, that membership, then you are allowed to request a password. It needs to be specifically defined. By default, it's empty. So you need to put something in there that is allowed. Most of the times, it is a server or multiple servers, but because this attribute is quite difficult to manage because it's a permission and there's no really easy interface for it, except for, let's say, using PowerShell, most of the times people put a group in there and then add computer accounts to that group. So, again, one of the examples regarding the password, how it works. So, using AD PowerShell, I'm assuming in this scenario, the first box, that you are allowed to retrieve the password. And because you are allowed to retrieve the password, you will see this attribute, the third from the top, MSDS managed password. So if you are allowed, you will actually see a value. If you're not allowed, even though if you request it, nothing is returned. So in this case, you will see all kinds of crazy stuff, and then using DS internals, you can change, or at least recalculate that so-called Chinese stuff that you see on the screen to something that is a hash, the current one and the previous one. Now, if you again use DS internals and check what the password is on the account itself, so the top one was requesting AD, the domain controllers, and then in the lower right corner you see what is on the actual account, and as you can see that it's exactly the same, because otherwise the whole authentication would never work. Again, for this type of account, group managed service accounts, I created again a script that displays all the information. Feel free for all those scripts, by the way, with the QR codes or the links to grab them from my GitHub and use them as you see fit. Again, when it was changed, and when you look at a few columns, pwint is the so-called interval. You see 142 at the top, but also the default 30. And then you see a column PSHC, which is password should have changed. And then you see yes or no. And you see all DOX, and DOX is abbreviation that I came up with, days until expiry. Both columns tell you the exact same information. If you look at the answer no or yes, should have changed. If the answer is, if you see that it's yes, then you know that the account is not even being used by a server, or that something is broken. It's not easy visible, but you see somewhere in the middle, -76. Well, I know from the top of my head that was -760 something days. That means that the password of that account should have already been changed almost 2 years ago. And this is the output if you have the accounts that are in your Active Directory, but nothing is using them. In other words, there could be a risk looking at the permissions that those accounts might have. So make sure to look at your Active Directory. You can use these scripts if you want to, and check if you have unused accounts. Which current KDS root keys are being used, also when they were created, and also the previous ones, which are the principals that are allowed to get the password. On the left part, you will see what is configured, but also on the right part of that box, you'll see which servers actually are allowed. It basically expands the whole membership so that you can see which can retrieve based on the SAM account name or the SID. Delegated Managed Service Accounts, the new cool stuff in 2025. It's basically the exact same stuff as a group managed service account, but a huge amount of steroids on top of it. It has more capabilities because Microsoft saw that people were not moving away for the legacy stuff, so they had to come up with something that helped those people. This helps them. There are just, unfortunately, a few catches. Like, the group managed service account, Active Directory has a copy, and the server that uses the account also has a copy of that password. The difference between delegated with the delegated service account is AD obviously has a copy of the password, but the server itself does not anymore because it works differently, totally different mechanism. Why is that important? Well, there are reasons that I'm not going to discuss right now because it's quite a long story, this whole scenario on top of it. It cannot be requested anymore via LDAP, where the group managed service account could be queried, the delegated one cannot be queried anymore. It has to be requested through a so-called ticket granting service ticket, through TGT again for the account that is allowed to request it. And this is the reason. When you look at it for a gMSA, everyone is allowed to request the password. And when you look at the dMSA at the bottom, you see at the left a deny. In other words, they prevent an LDAP query for delegated managed service accounts. Authenticated users are allowed to see gMSAs, but not dMSAs. And again, it's a permission. They added more security so that it is not easily visible by, let's say, regular accounts. So they changed the permissions. In this case, they removed a specific permission, being authenticated users read, so because it was removed, cannot be used then again. dMSA support, you have to think about two things. First, you need to have an Active Directory that actually supports the account. Supporting not just the creation itself, because to create delegated managed service accounts, you only need to extend the schema. That's it. To actually use those accounts, you need at least one 2025 domain controller. At least one. But the advice is, have more. And there's a reason for it. If you don't, and you also need to have, and this is the downside of this account, so Microsoft helps, or at least try to help people to move from those legacy accounts to the delegated ones, but then the conditions of when can you use it are crazy. Think about it, as I mentioned, you need a 2025 domain controller, and you can only use a delegated managed service account on a 2025 server. So if you think, oh, let's upgrade Active Directory to 2025 and start using delegated managed service accounts, no. You have to move all your application landscape to 2025. And then when you think about it, nobody's going to do that in a very short term. It can take years. So support is not available, at least not enabled by default. If you have 2025 domain controllers, 2025 server, it's still not enabled by default. On the server itself, in AD, everything is ready to go, but it's on the server itself, and there's a reason. If it's not enabled, as soon as you try to use a delegated managed service account, you get something like password are incorrect. Doesn't work, because the whole mechanism is disabled. Can be enabled through GPO or registry, and the downside, and here it comes, although the documentation tells you, and it's in the box that this one, that appears, the documentation tells you you only need one domain controller. Technically, that is correct. But if you have quite a lot of servers and you only have one 2025 domain controller, and let's say lots of 2025 servers using delegated managed service account, all those servers will not look at any other domain controller anymore besides the 2025 one. So let's say that if you have 2019 or 2022 and just one 2025, as soon as you enable delegated managed service account support on that specific server, authentication for any account, doesn't matter what, user, computer, the group managed service, anything will go to the 2025. So probably that thing will burn down because of the load, and all the others are doing nothing. So that's why technically only you need one, but realistically you need a lot more to be able to support the whole load. There are two use cases for dMSAs. The native use, like the gMSA, you have a service, schedule task, and you configure the account directly in there, or you have a legacy service account, the one with the static password, and you link it, you migrate it to a delegated one so that it basically takes over. The account still needs to exist, the old one, but the whole dMSA thing takes it over, and that allows you to migrate it. And the last one is the exact scenario that Microsoft is focusing on to help people move away from that legacy stuff. You're not really moving away because you need to keep them in place in a specific state. We'll discuss that later. One of, again, tricky parts, at least it could be tricky, is that dMSA creation and management is considered tier 0. In other words, very high privileged because of the powers that it has. The inner guts, dMSAs, it has a so-called state. the dMSA account and the superseded account, see it as the legacy account, whatever that may be. The intention of the so-called superseded account is a service account. But there's nothing technically that prevents you from using something else. Like, for example, instead of using a service account, let's for example, link the domain admin to the dMSA. What could go wrong? Own the dMSA. If it's linked with the domain admin account, you own the domain. And maybe even the whole forest. It depends on all kinds of things. It's like in IT, everything, it depends. So it has a state. When you look at the state of these accounts, 0, at least for the dMSA, it's not being used. Migration, for 1, the migration has started, there's a reason for it, and it has ended if it's 2, and it's 3, native use, like a gMSA. The superseded account has the same state. It needs to match with the other one. Especially the migration and the end state need to be the same. And then those accounts are linked with each other. The legacy account points to dMSA, the dMSA account points to the legacy service account, and that's how both know about each other. There's a problem though. Admin as the holder has a process that protects powerful accounts, like for example the domain admin account. So all accounts in Active Directory have specific permissions. You as a person can configure specific permission on groups and accounts or whatever you want. But when you have to deal with so-called protected groups and protected accounts, those permissions are inherited from admin as the holder. It's a process that checks it and stamps the permissions that are on admin holder, it copies them onto those objects, which protects them so that regular users cannot, let's say, misuse them. However, if you link a protected account, doesn't matter which one, to a dMSA, you would expect that the dMSA also becomes a protected account. No, it does not. So suddenly, through the dMSA, you would be able to, which is not, for example, protected, because it's linked, you can suddenly access a protected account. Something to keep in mind. And again, for the dMSA, same story. As the group managed service accounts, with the exception that over here you can see the state and also which account is being linked with the dMSA in the upper left 2 red boxes. Initiating the migration. The whole idea of initiating the migration is, as I mentioned, tier 0, high privilege. So only domain admins can initiate the migration from a legacy service account to a dMSA. Cool. It's privileged and secure. When that happens, you need to start a commandlet. That commandlet under the hood triggers a so-called operational attribute. It triggers an operational attribute because the meaning of an operational attribute is not just writing one action or one value. No, the operational attribute is basically telling the domain controller, and then somewhere in the code it's specified what it needs to do. But the operational attribute is always about performing all kinds of actions, multiple actions. And to not put that burden on you, that's how they did it. You trigger the operational attribute through a PowerShell commandlet, and then the domain controller performs all the actions that are needed for all the things to work. What happens? The legacy service account gets write permissions on the allowed to retrieve password list, the MSA, the group MSA membership attribute. So the legacy service account gets write permissions onto that attribute. And there's a reason for that I will explain later. And there it is. When you start the migration, the dMSA receives state 1, and it links the service account to the dMSA. And the red text is just basically to tell you that, hey, that group is not part of that whole process. It was something that I already had put there just to see what happens with it. So it's not part of the whole process. When you look at the legacy service account itself, the same is true. It links the dMSA, and it puts it in the exact same state, which is 1. And 1 in this case means the migration of this whole thing has started. Before the migration, this is how authentication works. You have a service using the service for, in this case, SQL. You've got a server running SQL. That SQL service runs the service account.SQL. It authenticates to the domain controller using its TGT, and it requests a TGS. Done, nothing special. Now, during the migration, there's a difference. The reason that it's not a 0 or 1, no, it's start the migration, wait some time, and then complete it. Because it's all about those servers that are allowed to use that account need to have the time to tell the new account that they are going to use it by allowing it to grab the password, because it's a whole different mechanism and it needs to be able to complete the whole process. So there's why there's a time between the start and ending it. So how does it work? The service account requests with its TGT requests a TGS. The domain controller responds with that TGS, but in this case, the TGS has it is a TGS, but in the end, it's basically a TGT in a TGS. But the domain controller responds with additional information. In this case, the domain controller responds, hey, you have been, because the migration is now starting, meaning 1, the domain controller now tells the machine, hey, although you are using this legacy service account, in the future, and that's what you see on the right corner, this is that is been superseded by a new account, and in the right corner you will see, hey, this is the this is the delegated managed service account that it's going to be used in the future. So it's already preparing the server, telling it this is what's going to happen in the future. And because of that, in the third action, because the server was told this is the new delegated managed service account that's going to be added, to be used in the future, the server now uses this legacy service account to add the computer account of the server itself to there's a whole story, to the allowed to retrieve password list on the delegated managed service account. So let's retry again, because it's a very long story. The server was told, or the server knows, I'm going to use the legacy service account. But the domain controller told it, no. Oh, well, it's 2 for now, but in the future, this is what's going to happen. So because the server was told what's going to happen in the future, it needs to prepare itself. Because of that, the server got that answer. The server will now use the legacy service account to add itself, and itself in this case the computer, to the so-called allowed to retrieve password list on the delegated managed service account. Because when an account is in the allowed to retrieve password list, it is allowed to request Active Directory, hey, what is the password? And there it is. When you look under the hood, you will see that on the delegated managed service account, it updates its attribute by adding the computer account. Completing it. That's when all the servers involved in this whole mechanism, because most of the times, and that's why I'm using SQL, SQL is a cluster of servers, at least 2 or maybe even more. So all those machines have to go through the exact same process. And when you look at the whole thing, you need time so that all those servers have had the time to process all the information and everything is ready to say, let's complete this. And when do you complete the migration? It's you that determines this. It's not the service, no, it's you that determines, okay, we've had enough time, let's complete the migration. And again, you complete the migration by using, and this is, by the way, per dMSA account, it's not a whole thing, no, it's per dMSA account. You complete the migration using PowerShell commandlet, which then again triggers a operational attribute, but in this case with the value 2, meaning the state is going to move to 2, which means end of migration. And this is what happens. It removes the permissions that were set before. It removes the permissions of the of the legacy service account from the dMSA, because it's not needed anymore. In addition, it also performs, and this is what I meant, the servers have added themselves to the principals allowed to retrieve the managed password list. This is what happened during the migration. And then at the same time, the accounts are linked. The legacy service account, and as you can see on the lower part, is disabled. It's going to be disabled. When that also happens, the state is obviously changed to 2, and the configuration that was on the legacy service account is going to be migrated to the Delegated Managed Service Account. Think about SPNs. The only thing that is not migrated, that's is kept on the legacy service account, are the group memberships. Those remain on the legacy service account. Those are not migrated. And that's, you might think, but why is that not migrated? Well, I will tell you how the whole mechanism works, and then you also probably will understand why it could be an attack. So on the right, you will see in the black box all the things that are migrated from the legacy service account to the delegated one. One thing that still needs your attention is the so-called allowed or denied list on RODCs. If it's specified through a group, then everything is fine, because then it inherits the group membership. But if an account is specified directly on that list, you have to migrate that information itself, because those are based on distinguished names. And those are not transferable in this case. How does it work? You can see that the account is running for the SQL service. And as you can see, it is linked with the dMSA, but it's disabled, the arrow pointing down. And still authentication still works, although the account is disabled. You are asking why. I will explain. The server will now again try to authenticate using the legacy service account, although it's disabled. Let's say that the server doesn't know it's disabled, because it's like, hey, this is what it's running on, let's use it. The domain controller responds back, and that's what the ticket means, client revoked. In other words, the account is disabled, dude, you cannot use this. Okay. But again, almost similar to the previous step. The old account has been disabled. Dear server, the old account has been disabled. Don't use that anymore. Use this account, the Delegated Managed Service Account that has been linked with the legacy one, which is in the right corner, the dMSA one. And because the server was allowed to retrieve the password, it now knows, okay, I will try to use that one. So it issues a re-authentication for using its own server account in requesting a TGS from the Active Directory, saying, hey, give me TGS for this dMSA. Think about the configuration being moved, the group membership still being on the old account. What happens then? And this is the fun part. Active Directory, because those accounts are linked, migration has completed. It looks at the pack, all the configuration of the legacy account, and the configuration of the Delegated Managed Service Account, and it merges all together. And that's why you can see that in the left part, that the groups are merged into one pack. In other words, anyone using that dMSA has the powers of the dMSA itself, but also of the legacy one. Think about it. What could go wrong? But also, and this is also another one, the account, as soon as the migration has completed, shouldn't, and I'm talking about the legacy one, as soon as the migration has completed, do not delete the account. Deleting the account breaks the linkage between the service and the dMSA, so the whole service will basically drop dead. It's disabled, keep it there, do not delete. If you have the question, can I change the password on the legacy service account? Yes, you can, but don't do it right after completing the migration, because the migration allows you to go back. And if you go back and you've changed the password, stuff will break. So as soon as the migration has completed, wait, be patient. Let's say after a month or so, where you have confirmed everything is working, then change the password of the legacy one. Can be anything. Change it to, I don't know, put something in there. You don't even need to know what the password is. Just put something in there, as long as it's very strong. Because When the packs are merged, the system will grab the hash every single time the TGS is generated. It will grab the current hash of the legacy service account and put it in the TGS. Think about it. Again, what could go wrong? So you have a TGS, you have a dMSA that is so powerful in terms of permissions. When you perform such a migration, I think for many it will work, but there's a few, and I only know about one of them. It's ADFS. If you perform such a migration using a legacy service account and you're still using ADFS, and you complete the migration, ADFS will break. You had all kinds of nice errors complaining all over the place. And the reason for it is that ADFS internally references the old account. So you have migrated on the server, you have migrated in Active Directory, everything is done, but ADFS itself, it uses a database, it references the old account, but that was not changed by you. So that's why ADFS will break and complain all over the place using these events. What can you do? It's fixable. You just need to perform an additional action, because when you look in the database, you see what the previous value is, which was marked in red, the existing service account. You add, during the migration, the new service account, which is the dMSA, so it becomes aware of the new one. And then when completing it, you remove the old one. Then all is fine. The moral of the story is, when you perform such a migration, make sure to investigate your application to understand that that application has some, let's call it, hard-coded reference to the account being used. If it has, you need to do something. And you need to figure out if it's possible to, let's say, tell it to use the other account, because if it's not, then probably you cannot perform the migration. Bad successor. I think gave all kinds of hints, and this is what, without the patch before August 12, 2025. Merging the pack. What are the conditions? So merging the pack, the memberships, but also the hashes of the old account. There was just one condition, two conditions. It looked at the end state and also which account was linked. It never looks at how it got to the account state. How it got to the account state means unused 0, you start the migration, it's 1, and you end, it's 2. A whole flow of things. But nothing prevents me from just writing 2 as a state, link it to some account, known account. What are known accounts? No. Which accounts in Active Directory have known, distinguished names, and are very powerful? There are 2. Who knows? Sorry? Yeah? There's one. The other one? No.
Enterprise admin.
No. It's the same. Domain admin, enterprise admin. It's the default domain admin. That's the first one, but there's another one. The CURB account.
Yeah.
So, but if you link the domain admin to a dMSA that you control, without this patch, you own the forest, period. Because it's just, and the account can even be disabled. Just link it, add status 2 on the dMSA, done, game over. CURB account is also a known account. Golden ticket attack, that's basically what you could do. So one is taking over the forest, and the other one is the golden ticket attack, and then leads to the taking over the forest. So well-known accounts, very tricky. And as I mentioned, I can write, and for whatever reason, Microsoft in this case did not protect the regular LDAP rights to those attributes. I still do not know why, because they should have protected it.
Dang it.
So anyone controlling any dMSA, again, without the patch, anyone controlling the dMSA through the create child permissions or full control, write decal or whatever. So if you control the dMSA in any way, in any form, you are able to link it to any account and take over the whole thing. It will hurt. And then this is what I've done by using a bad actor account, requesting a dMSA to which I linked the default domain admin, just to try it out to see what happens. And this is what you will see. Look on the right, all the writs, meaning I inherited all the powers and permissions of the domain admin. So now I have a dMSA that's a nothing, but because it was linked to the domain admin, I now have all the power that I have. Domain admin, enterprise admin, the domain admin account itself. So I could have a lot of fun in this AD. It's basically game over. Patched successor. That is, with the patch. They changed a few things. So at the beginning, it only looked at the state and the link on the dMSA itself. So if you control the dMSA without the patch, you're done. Now they changed and added conditions. If you control the dMSA, won't work anymore with the patch. You also need to control the account that you are linking to. And that is not possible unless you already have other permissions, but then okay, because now Active Directory looks at the state for both accounts, and they need to be linked to each other. So it has become more difficult. Still not protected. But then additional control is needed, because think about it. A domain admin, Kerberos TGT account, those are protected accounts. Admin as the holder protects them with special permissions. Nobody can just do stuff on those. But imagine having an account that has so many powers because of permissions in AD, but it's not protected. By linking that account, if I still can control it in some way or another, by linking that account, I can take over whatever that account can do. And if it's like something like having full control on, let's say, admin as the holder, or resetting passwords, I can still get around. Again, all those permissions, but now it's on the account and the dMSA itself. The same permission set still apply. And when you look at it, although it has been now controlled, or more contained, the whole attack technique is still valid. It's just more difficult to get there. Not impossible, more difficult. If with the patch you try the old behavior, you get a Kerberos error. Basically, doesn't work because of the patch. They changed it. Tier 0, how do you, let's say, monitor this? As I explained at the beginning, there's a whole flow, 0, 1, 2. If suddenly somebody writes 2 and links an account, that's not right. So you need to monitor for that. If suddenly there is no flow, but stuff is written. For patch successors, same story. If suddenly on both accounts somebody registered the same state and the linked accounts, something is going wrong, but because both still need to go through the whole flow. So one of the key things that you need to do is review your delegation model. I wrote a script in Active Directory that checks for all that stuff. So these are the things you need to look out for, because account operators has permissions all over the place. It's very powerful. And also look at the permissions, and then using the script that I wrote, it outputs you where the explicit permissions are, or configurations that you need to pay attention to. So it's on my GitHub, by using the QR code or the link. Consider implementing a tiering model, hiding objects. If you hide the object, you cannot determine its DN. Now, both the Kerberos TGT account and the default domain admin are in the users container, default container. So if you create a tiering model that has, let's say, been enhanced with very special permissions, you also need to make sure it's invisible from a content perspective, so that regular users cannot see the content of that tiering model. If you put those accounts in there, you cannot determine the DN anymore. But then again, even with the patch, it's just to make sure that everything is as secure as possible. Moving the default domain administrator account, from a Microsoft perspective, Microsoft tells you, yeah, it's okay if you do that. For the Kerberos TGT account, they tell you it's not recommended, whatever that means. I don't know. During my investigation, and I was not the only one because many others also performed the investigation and published this, is one of the things that I found on, let's say that you do not want to use dMSAs at all. There's one thing that you can change in the schema. By the way, it's reversible. It's explained in the link that I'm going to show you, is to prevent writing anything to specific attributes important for the whole dMSA part. And because you block it, nothing can be written. It means that the whole dMSA migration scenario cannot be used. You can use it for native use, but you cannot use it anymore for the migration start, which basically means that this whole attack technique doesn't work anymore. It's something that I found out, it's explained, it can be configured, it's in the schema. Some may think, oh, schema, you cannot reverse it anymore. Normally that's true, but in this case you can still reverse it. So it's explained in these blog posts, all kinds of blog posts talking about how this whole thing works and what you need to pay attention to. I talked a lot also about the KDS root key, because the KDS root key is the source for the password of the group managed service account and the delegated managed service account. Anyone owning the KDS root key can generate any password. The future one, current one, and even, the past ones, the current one, and even the future passwords. Because if you own the source key for the passwords, including the metadata of the account itself, you can generate whatever it is. And you need to audit it. So in every single domain, you need to configure the SACL. You need to configure auditing on all the domains and then configure the auditing on the specific keys so that if anyone ever thinks in touching those keys, you will warn about it. Because nothing, really nothing, should ever access those keys besides the domain controllers themselves. No person needs access to those. And this is how you can configure it. So if a bad actor, in this case, touches the keys, you will see an event ID. And that's what you need to look out for. But be aware that the domain controller also touches those keys. So those you can, this is a false positive. The other one is a true positive. Something just to make you aware of. If you're using managed service accounts, standalone, group, or delegated, by default, it's put in the managed service accounts container. And I've already talked to companies that mistakenly they deleted the managed service accounts container and all the managed service accounts in them. Why? Many OUs and containers are protected from accidental deletion. This one, by default, is not. So by just adding one checkbox, you can prevent yourself making a mistake, which is the checkbox here on the left, protect from accidental deletion. Just check that, and it's preventing you from making that silly mistake. Caching the account. Using the GUI for the managed service accounts, it's not possible. Caching accounts on RODCs, you cannot use the GUI because, as you can see, it's computer and users only. You can use PowerShell, though. And then when you see that the dates on both the writable and the RODC are exactly the same, including the version as you see on the right, then you see it has been cached. If you want to remove it again, well, the password has already been exposed on the RODC. The best way would be to remove it from the allowed list, then reset the password. But then again, how do you reset a password on a gMSA? You can't. You have to wait. Less impactful, but also less secure, is to purge the password from the RODC. And then as you can see, the writable tells you what the actual date is with version 4, and the RODC tells you version 4 with some date in 1601, which means it's not cached.